What is Shimano Di2 shifting all about? What's it like using it after using mechanical shifters for over 20 years? And is it worth making the switch from mechanical to Di2? Those are the questions that I'll attempt to answer in this full review of Shimano Di2 shifting. The Di2 that I'll be reviewing is on my cyclocross bike, and this is a 9er BSB 9 RDO. And when I got the bike, I actually did not intend to get Di2. I was going to get mechanical Ultegra shifting with the hydraulic disc brakes, and they were back ordered with the components from Shimano, and so I got a really good deal on the Di2 and went that route. This is the Di2 that's fully internal. In other words, it does not have the battery externally mounted, which would typically go on top of the down tube or underneath the down tube. This battery is in the seat post, and let me take a minute to show you what that's like. So here is the internal Shimano Di2 battery. It's the SMBTR2, which I think is the same one they use for Ultegra and for Dura-Ace. It does come, when you get these, with these shims and clips to install it in the seat post. Mine with the 9er, and I don't know if this is just something that 9er included or if this, I'm sure it's something you can buy aftermarket, but it has these rubber shims that hold the battery really well in the seat post, and it's very easy. So all you do is you wrap these around the battery, and then you would just insert it into the seat post, and it is extremely secure. So that's in there, and it's really hard to get this out. I mean, you got to pinch and work this thing out, so there's no way that this is going to fall out of the seat post when you're riding. And so I've got my my cable coming out of the frame that has run down through the down tube and then up through the seat tube, and then I would just plug it in here. You got to make sure it clicks, and there's actually a little tool that Shimano includes with well, actually they don't include it, the bike shop had it, but it's a little tool that when the Di2 is new, to insert these cables into the connectors, it's a little hard, and you have to use that tool to pop them in. I found that after they've been installed, you can do it much easier by hand. I would recommend getting that tool. I personally don't have one in my house. The bike shop has one. So after it's in there, you would just put the seat post back into the bike, and it's a very, very clean install. So you don't have with the, like you did with the external battery, the battery sitting on the outside, which for cyclocross is, to me, almost a necessity to have the seat post battery and have it internal like that. Let me talk real quick about the install. And by the way, this is kind of a follow-up review that I did on my first kind of overview, first look of Di2, and I went a little bit more into the install. But one thing that I really like about Shimano Di2 is how easy it is to install. Really, all you're doing is running your cables through your frame and then plugging them in to your derailleurs. So there's my little shim that came out there. So all you're doing is just plugging them in. Obviously, there's no cables that you have to tension and get adjusted properly. It's just routing them through the frame, and getting them through the frame is probably the hardest part. Different bikes are going to be easier or harder to get cables through the frame. This one was not too bad. And so everything is very clean, very internal. As I showed you, the battery is inside the seat post. The only thing external that you would have over mechanical would be the just this little junction box, the brains of the system here. So one big advantage of Di2 is, again, just how simple it is to set up and install. And let me talk about this junction box here. This is where you have your charge port. Again, this is something that I did on my first look, but you would just pop that cover open and charge it through there. And it's on the left side as I have it mounted here. Also on this junction box is an indicator, and if you hold the shifter down for about a second, you're going to get some lights here. And you see that green light came on. The green light that stays on means you have at least 75% charge. If it blinks green, you got 50%. If it stays on red, you've got I think it's 25%. And then if it's blinking red, it's definitely time to charge it. Now I want to focus mainly on the shifting here, but let me just say that like I mentioned before, I do have the hydraulics, and The brakes have really good feel, and I'm not going to really go into the braking review, but let me just say that one thing I don't like, and probably the only thing I don't like, is how far the levers come in. And I've tried, these are bled properly, there's really no sponginess in the system, and I've made all the adjustments that I can, but if you have your fingers in the way, they can hit your fingers, so you've actually got to learn to ride with your fingers a little bit higher, so that the internal paddle does not hit your fingers. That's really my only complaint with the hydraulic brakes. Everything else is great. I've been using hydraulics for a very long time. I prefer them, and on a cyclocross bike they make a really big difference in the power and the modulation of the braking. So let me talk about the shifting. Just like mechanical, the internal paddle will shift into the smaller cog or bigger gear, and I'll do that real quick. You can just see it shift, and I'll go back. And to go back up to a bigger cog, easier gear, you would touch the button on the outside of the shifter. Now, the advantage of Di2 is how quick the shift is. I've heard people say it's more like a mouse click than actual, activating a lever like you would in the mechanical, which is pretty true. They're set up well because it's not just a super light touch. And if it was like that, you would accidentally shift. You actually, you have to push on it. It doesn't require a lot of force. It's probably a little bit less force than mechanical, but the shifting is very quick and very precise. There are no cables that need to be adjusted, so cables will not stretch out. You're going to get the exact shift every time. And to me, that is the #1 advantage of Di2, is shift after shift, thousands of shifts are going to be just like the one before it. And so that precision and accuracy really helps you to not have to think about shifting, especially with the front derailleur. The other nice advantage is the front derailleur will trim along with the rear. So as the chain moves to a smaller cog in the back, and the front derailleur will actually trim over so that you don't get any chain rub. And that's another thing that takes the thinking out of shifting, so you don't have to manually trim the front derailleur as the chain moves over. One slight disadvantage that I've noticed is that I actually have more misshifts than I did on mechanical, because when you're shifting, your brain is thinking button. Whereas the mechanical, if you're wanting to go to a harder gear, for instance in the back, you know that you got to hit this paddle. If you want to go to an easier gear, you know you got to move the whole lever over. With the Di2, like I said, your brain's kind of thinking buttons, so sometimes I would hit the outside of the shifter when I meant to hit the paddle, or vice versa. So, that's probably, I've used this for about 9 months now, and, probably it's going to get easier, and that will happen less, and it has happened less, but it still happens from time to time. So that may depend on the individual, but for me, again, I had more misshifts with the Di2 than with the mechanical. Another huge advantage with the Di2 is the fact that you can hold down the lever and it will keep shifting until you let up. And you can dump a whole bunch of gears quickly if you have to. Now, is it quicker than mechanical? Like I said, I've been using mechanical for so long that I have gotten really efficient. So if I wanted to shift down or actually shift up 3 gears on the mechanical, I would tap this real quick 3 times, and if you're like me and you've been using mechanical for a long time, you've gotten it down to where you can do that quickly. I probably wouldn't say it's any quicker than the Di2. It's just nice to be able to hold this down. And as you know, with the mechanicals, to go to easier gears in the back, if you wanted to go up 2, 3, or 4 gears, you could move the whole lever over quite a bit, and you could dump more gears, whereas this, you would just hold it down. Now with Di2, you can actually program the system to do different things. For instance, you could, in theory, swap your shifter. So the left side could do the rear and the right side could do the front. I don't know why you would do that, especially if you've been using mechanicals for so long and you're used to the way it's set up, but you could do that. You can also adjust how many gears shift. You know, like I have it set up so I can hold these down and shift a bunch of gears, but you can program the speed in which it shifts, how many gears shift when you do that. So you can really customize it, and the purpose of this video is not to really go into the customization, but it is there. You can also update the firmware of the system, and you can diagnose the system. And let me mention a complaint that I have regarding that. And I'll go into this in a minute with the battery, but I actually had a problem with my Di2 very recently. And so I hooked my, I plugged the charger in, and the other end of the charger has a USB, and you can plug it into the computer and diagnose the system and make changes. Now, I called Shimano about that because of the problems I was having, and they actually recommended there's another component that you can get to do that plugs directly into one of these ports. In other words, you're not using the charger, and they recommend using that tool over the charger. And they said especially when you update the firmware and do diagnostics, you need to use that tool. The problem with that is it's somewhat expensive, and it's not really a consumer tool. It's more of something with the shop. So even though you can download the eTube software, and that is the software that you would use to update your Di2, you can download that software, but you can't easily access the tool without ordering it through a shop. So personally, I think if Shimano is going to allow that software to be downloaded, allow end users to do customization, I think they should include that tool with the Shimano Di2. So to me, that's definitely a disadvantage to the way Shimano sells the Di2 system. And incidentally, the part number that I refer to is an SM-PCE1. That is the tool that you would use to fully customize, fully diagnose a Shimano Di2 system. I had this system last for about 5 months before I actually had to do a charge, and that was through a full season of cyclocross racing. So you can go quite a long time. I think anybody can go at least several months without having to charge the system, again by hooking your charger up to the junction box up here. So it's not like a cell phone or a bike light where you're charging it every day. You can really just forget about it for several months. Now, with cyclocross, you're actually shifting a lot more than most people would do on a road bike. So you, in theory, probably could go 6-8 months on a road bike if you don't shift a whole lot with Shimano Di2. So now let me go into the problem that I had with this system, and honestly it has put a damper on my experience using Di2 and honestly my confidence in the system right now. And that is the fact that my battery gave out a few weeks ago, and I have only charged the battery one time, and I think it had the green light lit up on the junction box, so it had at least 75% charge the last time I checked it a few weeks ago. I took my bike out to go on a ride, and the system was absolutely dead. I actually had an event planned that weekend, a gravel grinder event, that I ended up not going to because my son had a soccer game and I missed the event. But I went to go out on a ride, I think that afternoon or the next day, and the bike was completely dead. And it ended up being the battery. And Shimano has replaced the battery. I just got it in yesterday. The new battery works fine. It's the battery that I showed you in the clip of how it goes into the seat post. But the fact that the battery went out with only one charge is something that I'm very concerned about. And I actually talked to a friend of mine who his battery did the same thing, and we're in Florida, and whether it's the heat and humidity that has to do with it, now I really haven't used this bike through just the heat of the summer yet, but he's personally known 2 or 3 other people that have had problems with these internal batteries. And the batteries themselves are light. I did not mention that, but the battery weighs 58 grams, so it's a very light battery. But it seems to me that there is a problem with the durability of these batteries, and like I said, it's really given me some concern. And you can buy these batteries to have a backup, which if I keep this bike, it would be something that I would do. The problem is those things are expensive. They're usually going for about 130. I think the retail is 160 to 200, and I believe it's the same battery used in Dura-Ace and Di2. But it's expensive, and to go, to spend 130 bucks to have a battery in your toolbox, just in case your other one goes bad, it's a big investment. But it's something that I think you would have to do until you can fully be confident of how long these batteries are going to last, because God forbid you drive 8 hours to a gravel grinder event or plan a whole weekend around cyclocross racing or road racing and cannot have a bike that works. So if you're a racer, I think at this point I would say you would need to get a backup battery. Another slight disadvantage with Ultegra Di2 is the fact that it does weigh a little bit more than mechanical. And I think I went through the different components and added them all up, and I calculated about half a pound, give or take. So you are having to pay a little bit of a weight penalty. Now, I have not done a lot of research into Dura-Ace Di2, but from what I'm told and from what I've read, the Dura-Ace is actually slightly lighter in the Di2 version than the mechanical. So other than the battery problems, everything else on the system has been perfect. Again, every shift is great. And as far as the ease of shifting, I did not mention this earlier, but it's the front derailleur that really has an improvement as far as the ease of shifting. And as many of you know, with mechanical front derailleurs, a lot of times to go into that bigger chain ring, you've got to really torque that lever. You got to put a little bit of effort into it. It's not too bad, but with the Di2, all you're doing is tapping the outside of the shifter, and it shifts. So it's a really just effortless shifting. So I'm just going to tap the outside, and it just shifts really efficiently. Another advantage to Di2 is how easy it is to adjust your derailleurs. So if you're going to do that, all you do, there's a button underneath the junction box here. You would hold that down, and it goes into this adjustment mode, and then every touch of a paddle makes just a very minute adjustment. And so once you've got your shifting right, you've got your derailleurs adjusted, you would tap the button and it comes out of adjustment mode. Now, the nice thing about that is it's very easy to do when you're riding. So you can just hold that button down, make your adjustments, tap the button again, and you've got a perfectly adjusted derailleur. And I've said this before, but once you've got those derailleurs adjusted, they will hold that adjustment. And that to me is probably one of the biggest advantages of Di2 over mechanical, is just how they hold that adjustment and how precise they are at shifting. So let me wrap up this video with my thoughts of Di2, starting with the advantages. Number one is how easy it is to do the install. And once you do the install, how easy it is to adjust your derailleurs. It's also a very clean setup. Everything can be internal. There are no cables that you've got to figure out where to go. You can either run them inside the frame, or if you have to, zip tie them on the outside. But it's just a very clean way of setting up your cables. And also the shifting is, I've said it so many times, but it's so precise, so accurate, and it requires less effort than mechanical shifting. The ability to customize the shifting with the eTube software is also another advantage. So let me go into the disadvantages of Di2. One, like I mentioned before, just the fact that Shimano doesn't include that tool to do the eTube adjustments, that's a little bit of a disadvantage to me. But I think, obviously cost. Let's talk about cost for a second, because Di2 definitely costs more than mechanical. So that's a disadvantage. The weight for Ultegra, with it being a little bit heavier, it's not a big deal. And if you're a Dura-Ace person, that's not really an issue from what I'm told. But for Ultegra, the weight is going to be a little bit more. The big disadvantage to me, and this kind of just jumps to the top of the list, is the fact that you're relying on a battery to get your bike to work. If it stops working, whatever gear you're in, that's the gear you're stuck in. And so the fact that I've had a battery go out really puts a damper on my experience, and that to me is the major disadvantage, is the fact that you could, in theory, go to an event and not have a bike that works. Now obviously with mechanical, yes, you've got problems, but I have used mechanical for over 20 years, and I've only broken a derailleur cable a couple times. And so the fact that I think now, for me, mechanical is more reliable, I'm going to say that the advantage definitely goes to mechanical in terms of that kind of reliability. Now as far as reliability in shifting, the Di2 has it, but if that battery ever goes out, you're stuck. And let me say, as far as speed in shifting, I can't personally say that I can make a significantly faster shift with Di2. I've gotten so good using mechanicals that it is a little bit faster, but to say that a race or sprint would be won or lost on Di2 or on Di2 versus mechanical, I can't really say that that is true at this point. So the real question now is, would I recommend Di2 over mechanical? For me personally, the answer is no. I think with the extra cost, the extra weight for Ultegra, and the reliability issue that I had with the battery, I personally would not go with Di2 again versus mechanical. And for me, that's an important finding, because with the mountain bike shifting coming out, I have had such good success with mechanical mountain bike shifting that personally I'm not going to switch to electronic shifting right now. That may change in the future. Now it's obviously a very personal decision, because just the coolness factor of Di2 is way up there. You've got the latest and greatest in shifting technology, and so it's going to be something that every person has to weigh the advantages and disadvantages. But for me personally, I'm going to stick with mechanical for all my current bikes that I have that are mechanical, and any future purchases that I make in the near future. So if you use Di2 or you're thinking about it, just leave some comments below for me and let me know your opinion on mechanical versus Di2. Now I may be one of a very small percentage who would actually prefer mechanical at this point over Di2, so I'm curious to know what you guys think. So that'll wrap up this full review of Shimano Di2 shifting. Thanks for watching.